Welcome to February's episode of Lift, Lighten, and Lead with Legacy Contracts. Whether this is your first time listening or you're returning for more, we're very glad you're here. This podcast is for attorneys who want more than just efficiency. You're looking for clarity on how your firm actually operates, how decisions are made, and where strain quietly forms beneath the surface. Today's episode is part of our new segment for 2026 called The Hidden File. It's a space where we examine things that shape law firms long before they become visible. The overlooked systems, the unspoken assumptions, the decisions that quietly determine whether a firm feels stable or strained. Our intention here isn't to add to the noise or give you any kind of quick fixes, but it's to name what's been operating unseen so that you can learn more with calm confidence and clarity. So we're going to begin. So February was a little bit different for legacy contracts. It wasn't really about naming the systems that we've done before. It wasn't about describing them either. It wasn't really invalidating feelings or offering you, tips, tricks, and tools or hacks or anything. You've probably already done all of that, watched all the YouTube videos, taken all of the workshops and training courses. But February for us was more so about the inertia, the forces that keep operations looping even when you have all that insight, when you've done all the research, when you've talked to all the consultants, when you've had all the consultations, it's really about what is underneath. So we're going to really dive into and recap everything that we've looked at within the month of February so that you can see for yourself any underlying mechanics that keep urgency, ownership, and communication stuck in those repetitive hamster wheel cycles. So at the start of February, the first pillar that we went over was about structure. Even when you have a process that's observed and documented and refined to the core, your system can still tend to revert. You can have deadlines that slip through the cracks, client intake processes that fall into pieces, and responsibilities that kind of can shift to different hands, or people just don't take up responsibility at all. And then it normally shifts back to like the attorney or managing partner that ends up having to make all these decisions that ends up halting a lot of the progress and changes. So discussing the structure and a lot of these pillars and being intentional was the first thing that we looked at. This was more so about diving into a lot of the mechanics. What were the intentions behind a lot of the systems? What were the things that you were looking to do when you created a lot of the processes? It's not just about making sure that the clients are coming in through the door. It's making sure you're asking them intentional questions that help you and help them flow through your intake process, or even, make sure that you can help them in general. It's looking at your billing systems and seeing what do you actually have to track, what's considered billable, non-billable in regards to your system or your firm in general, and then being intentional about sending it to the clients, making sure they're aware of what they're being charged and doing that on a consistent basis. The second pillar that we discussed was urgency, and it in regards to like not being a problem to fix, but more so as like a mechanism. When your team or even yourself, when you react to urgent matters, what does that create foundationally? Is it something that is set off with like fires that go off all around? Does it halt everything else when you have different urgent matters? Or does your system kind of account for it to still allow what's already present to make space for different urgent matters without pushing everything off to the back burner? And urgency is kind of one of those big things that ends up creating a bigger loop, especially with dealing with law firms. A lot of clients can come in with urgent matters, and when you don't have a legal case that goes on a day-to-day basis, for the everyday average citizen, everything can feel urgent, whether it's trying to get your estate plan because, they may have had like another family member pass and they feel like it's urgent for them to finally get their estate plan going, or they had a routine traffic stop that they feel was unjustified, or maybe they had a slip and fall in a grocery store that they want to press charges for. So it's like a lot of these things can be or even cannot be classified as urgent, but for your everyday person, it could feel like it's a very urgent matter. So accounting for that, being aware of that, but also making sure that your system still gives that buffer to have that understanding while also not allowing it to overthrow and overpower your own firm operations is another key portion of what we discussed in the month of February, and making sure that we bring to the surface that these things are going to happen. Clients are going to feel this way, but also making sure that we're not rocked by that. We're still able to stand on a solid foundation and grounding to make sure that our firm still operates, and we're not constantly halting when outside people, circumstances, or whatever else may have you decides that their urgency trumps everything else. And a good key portion here is, if you're recognizing that urgency in your firm is disrupting your patterns, it's something that continually gets in the way, or it's something that you feel like you have to stop your day for and constantly put out fires, the foundational question here is looking at not necessarily how to avoid it emotionally, but how to recognize if there's any patterns that are consistently coming up, how they're navigating or affecting your systems in place, and what you can do to kind of make space for that without putting a pause on everything else. And that tends to lead us into the third segment or pillar that we discussed in the month of February, which was ownership. Taking ownership of certain things, deciding who's owning certain tasks, and being able to clearly name that. Accountability in law firms tends to slide around to a lot of different people. And for the most part, it always, if not normally, ends up with either the managing partner or the founding partner of the actual law firm. And this doesn't mean that, people are neglectful. It doesn't mean that, your systems failed, but it's really just a clear indication that either clients or your employees, or maybe even yourself included, have a vaguely defined person who's supposed to be responsible for certain things. So if you recognize that, you have mail that's coming in that's piling up because nobody's scanning it in, or if, your voicemails are, or your voicemail box is full because nobody's, clearing it out or getting back to people. It could be anything, small, or things like if there's overdue invoices because nobody's following up on them, or if there are rejected court filings that nobody kind of had the space or capacity or even knew who was supposed to go back to take care of those. It could be big or small, but recognizing, anything that's coming in that potentially halt your system in the future or cause bigger mishaps later on, is deciding and discussing with not just yourself but your team who's responsible for those things, even if it's vague, who the responsibility should shift to, so that it doesn't end up having to constantly go back to the managing partner or founding partner. If you have a secretary at your firm and they may or may not be aware of mail that comes in all the time, if they're just mainly responsible for answering the phones, that could be something that's like, hey, if you see this coming in, if you could just take care of this up front. Or if you so happen to get any court rejections that you see in the mail, if you could give it to this person and then you can decide from there. Or just, kind of making sure that you're aware of it, even if it's small, being able to handle it where it is instead of waiting for it to become this overwhelming pile and then, having to go back and trying to figure out who has the bandwidth to take care of this as of now, will kind of take care of those loops up front, making sure that while these things may be minimal, you can decide, okay, who's the go-to person for these general areas? And then if it becomes a bigger thing, then we'd have to revamp the system. And the fourth and final segment of what we went over in the month of February was under why hard work isn't enough without the right systems in place. Really talking about how everybody's doing their best. Majority of people give 100% at their jobs every single day. But without that structure, the effort will be needed, if not more and more, on a consistent loop basis. To double check, triple check, and quadruple check every single detail, making sure that communicate 300%, putting in the effort and energy to overcompensate when talking to clients or co-counsel or even, any type of court systems. Hard work is something that's very applauded and kind of expected by society, and it's not negating the fact that everybody's out here trying their best, so hard work might look different for each person, but it cannot compensate if you do not have the right systems in place. And so this is where that hamster wheel comes in. If people can constantly feel like they're running this rat race, but they're not progressing any further, or their hard work isn't mattering in the places that it should be. And so it's looking at having the proper systems in place to create that positive momentum in the right direction, to make sure that what you're doing is mattering and it's making a difference and it's pushing your firm in the right direction, instead of seeing your employees and even yourself constantly burned out, looking for those small wins whenever they can get them, and living in the same cycles on a month-to-month basis. We focused a lot on, especially with the articles that came out with, of discussing the importance of having proper systems in place to match and give way to all of the effort that everybody's kind of putting in there. So focusing on and seeing these predictable mechanisms that we put in place and to have them perform on a consistent basis, making the goal be that observation and kind of be that, job well done at the end of the day, instead of just a band-aid to have kind of solution, making sure that it's being taken care of in the long run, and not just having those short small wins to kind of give yourself that breathing room, but taking care of that in the long run. So wrapping it all up, February was really just about structural inertia, explaining why systems revert, looking at urgency as kind of a self-reinforcing loop, discussing ownership and how that can naturally drift upwards, especially when it's not named, and effort without a proper structure will always fall under pressure. So we're not, looking at any feelings or validation, no quick fixes as solutions, but the mechanics that go on as the foundation for operations. So this is the intentions behind this, was looking at the structural gravity inside law firms and making it predictable and consistent with your design and default patterns for your operational systems. And all of this is mainly built towards having observation be the first step for that intentional intervention. And that in total was our month of February. I think it was a really insightful one that we did. It was a good segue from the month of January that we had. And then for the month of February, we'll kind of get into, for the month of March, we'll get more so into the assessments of those systems and then the calibration of them, where we take the next step from observation and turning into actionable understanding. We have a lot of good things coming out in March, a lot of new ideas, new events that we're having, and new products that we'll be releasing, new guides, new map kits, and all those other things. So we hope that you stay tuned for that. And if today's conversation resonated with you, you can explore February's concept much further by reading the articles on our LinkedIn page, or even watching our YouTube discussions, and listening to all of our previous podcast episodes, and also checking out our launch resources on our website. But here on this podcast for the Hidden File, it exists to slow things down, to reflect, contextualize, and give language to what many firms may feel but they haven't been taught to name. So we hope today's insight helps you move forward with greater clarity and less internal strain. Law firms aren't built in moments of urgency, but they are built through consistent, intentional choices. This is Legacy Contracts, and until next time, keep leading with clarity.